Texas, spring 1946. The war was over, but the dust at Camp Haven still rose like memory. From the highway, the camp looked half asleep. Barbed wire gone, guard towers empty, corrals filling with sunlight instead of soldiers. Inside the old parade field, the army had built something unexpected. A riding ring. The sign over its gate read, "Rehabilitation Program. Volunteer Cowboys Only." Corporal Ben Rawlins leaned against the fence rail, hat tilted back, boots dusted white from limestone soil. He'd been a ranch hand before Pearl Harbor, a medic during the Pacific Campaign, and now, somehow, a teacher in a camp that no longer held enemies. Behind him, 6 Japanese women in starched white uniforms waited in a nervous row, hands folded, eyes wide. "Ladies," the interpreter said gently, "today you learn, Texas, they weren't prisoners anymore. They were nurses. Survivors from a captured field hospital who had volunteered to remain until every wounded man was sent home. When peace came, someone in Washington had decided they could help with the rehabilitation effort. So they stayed. The first morning they saw horses. Most froze where they stood. Animals that large didn't belong to their world of triage tents and silence. Ben caught the look in their eyes, part wonder, part fear, and smiled. "Don't worry," he said, motioning to the chestnut mare nearest the gate. "She's all manners. Like a Sunday school teacher," the interpreter half translated, half laughed, and the nurses exchanged uncertain smiles. The mare snorted, tossing her mane, sunlight turning her hair to copper. Ben stepped forward, loose and easy. He stroked the horse's neck, then motioned one of the nurses closer. Her name was Aiko Sasaki, 24, the youngest of them. She moved with careful grace, the same way she approached patients, measured, listening with her eyes before her hands. When her fingers brushed the horse's flank, the animal shifted, testing her. Aiko flinched but didn't retreat. Ben noticed the steadiness in her breathing. "She's got the heart for it," he murmured. By noon, the camp yard smelled of hay and saddle soap. The cowboys, mostly veterans who hadn't found home yet, led the lessons. They taught how to hold reins, how to mount, how to trust the rhythm of an animal that responded to courage more than strength. Laughter began to replace hesitation. The scene looked absurd to outsiders. American cowboys and Japanese nurses circling a dusty corral, sunlight bouncing off white uniforms and leather tack. But to those inside the fence, something invisible shifted. The distance between enemy and neighbor shortened every lap. When Aiko finally swung onto the mare, applause erupted from both sides. Her cap slipped, black hair falling across her cheeks. Ben walked beside her, one hand on the bridle, the other ready to catch. "Lean with her, not against her," he said. She tried, clumsy at first, then found the rhythm. The mare trotted, hooves kicking up tiny clouds that caught the light like sparks. For a moment, the camp didn't feel like a remnant of war at all. It felt like a ranch on the edge of forgiveness. That afternoon, the canteen buzzed with talk. Some guards shook their heads. "Teaching them to ride? Next thing you know, we'll be square dancing," one muttered. But Sergeant Harris, the camp director, only smiled. "You want peace," he said. "You gotta let people touch the same ground." He understood what most didn't. The riding lessons weren't about horses. They were about dignity, about giving people who'd lived behind wire a sense of balance again. Ben noticed it too. Each lesson drew a small crowd, soldiers, townsfolk, even children from nearby farms. The Japanese nurses began to laugh more, trading English words for riding terms. "Sit deep," they'd echo. "Good hand," they'd tease. One morning, as the sun climbed pale over the pecan trees, Aiko arrived early. Ben was already there, tightening a saddle. She greeted him with a shy nod. "I practice alone, maybe?" she asked carefully. He hesitated, then handed her the reins. "Sure, but I'll walk alongside." They circled the ring slowly, hooves muffled by red dirt. Outside the fence, the camp's flag fluttered. The same flag that had flown during the war, now faded by peace. Aiko looked toward it and said softly, "When I was prisoner, I think this flag means no home. Now, maybe means everyone's home." Ben didn't answer right away. He just tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said, "that's the best thing I ever heard." Later that week, a storm rolled across the plains. Rain hammered the tin roofs, turned the corral into a river. Ben and the nurses worked side by side to lead the horses into the stables. Lightning flashed, thunder cracked, and Aiko slipped on the mud, nearly trampled. Ben caught her arm, pulling her clear. For a second, they stood chest-deep in rain, breathing hard, both laughing in disbelief. That image, two former enemies saving each other under a Texas downpour, would stick with every man who saw it. By evening, When the storm broke, the sky turned violet. Ben fetched a blanket, draped it over Aiko's shoulders. She thanked him with a slight bow. In the puddle between them, the reflection showed the U.S. flag and the red cross on her sleeve touching edge to edge. In the mess hall that night, Sergeant Harris raised a cup. "To the riders," he said. The men cheered. Someone played a harmonica. And in that faint music, drowned partly by the smell of rain and coffee, something like healing took root. Aiko glanced across the room at Ben. He was laughing with the Cowboys, hat still dripping from the storm. When he noticed her watching, he gave a small salute. The kind that said, "You're one of us now." For the first time since she'd stepped on American soil, Aiko believed it. By May 1946, the corral at Camp Haven had turned into something the Army hadn't planned for. A gathering place. Every Wednesday, the gates opened after morning roll call. Civilians from the nearby town of Mason drove in with their children, curious to see the Japanese nurses ride. The Cowboys joked that they'd become the gentlest rodeo in Texas. Ben Rollins spent most mornings oiling tack and answering questions from reporters who'd begun to trickle in from Dallas and San Antonio. He hated the attention. The program wasn't a show. It was a quiet lesson in coexistence. But the photographs, Japanese women in white uniforms on Texas horses, looked like hope itself. The letter one morning, the camp post truck brought a sealed envelope marked War Department, Program Review. Sergeant Harris opened it in his office while Ben waited outside. When the door finally creaked open, the older man rubbed his temples. "They're sending an inspector," he said. "Some folks in D.C. think we're turning the camp into a carnival." Ben stared at the floorboards. "They don't understand what it's doing for these women. Or for us." "Then we'll show 'em," Harris said. "Just keep those lessons running. Let the results speak." Word spread fast. The nurses felt the tension, though no one told them outright. Aiko noticed the stiffness in Ben's shoulders, the way he counted helmets during roll call, as if the Army might take their peace back. That night she left a note on his clipboard, written carefully in English. "We will ride our best. No fear." The fall 2 days before the inspection, the corral filled with onlookers. Wind swept across the field, lifting skirts and dust alike. Aiko mounted her mare, the same chestnut that once frightened her, and guided it into a trot. Ben watched from the rail, proud and uneasy. Halfway through the circuit, a stray banner tore loose from the fence. The horse spooked, veering sharply. Aiko lost balance, fell hard into the dirt. Gasps rose. A child cried. Ben vaulted the fence, kneeling beside her. Her wrist twisted awkwardly beneath her sleeve. She blinked through pain, forcing a small laugh. "I think horse not like flags." Ben smiled despite himself. "Guess she's still learning peace, too." He carried her to the infirmary. The camp doctor, a quiet man named Reed, examined her wrist. "Sprain, not break," he said. "She'll ride again in a week." But news of the fall reached town before the sun set. By evening, the Mason Gazette printed, "Japanese nurse injured in Army rodeo." The next morning, the church pastor wrote a letter demanding the program end. "Mercy is fine," he said from the pulpit, "but mockery of victory is not." The inspection. When the inspector arrived, he looked every inch the bureaucrat. Crisp khaki, clipboard, polished shoes too clean for Texas mud. He watched silently as the Cowboys saddled up, as the nurses, Aiko's wrist wrapped in white gauze, stood ready. "Proceed," he said flatly. Ben stepped into the ring, voice steady but low. "Today we'll demonstrate rehabilitation, for them and for us." The first riders moved out, sunlight gleaming off reins. When Aiko's turn came, she lifted her bandaged wrist, nodded, and mounted one-handed. The crowd went still. The mare trotted obediently, slower this time, careful. Each step seemed to erase a line between past and present. When they finished, the inspector turned to Harris. "I expected a circus," he said. "What I saw was therapy." He signed the report right there on the fence rail. The gift that evening, as the sun dropped behind the water tower, the nurses appeared outside the bunkhouse carrying a small wooden box. Aiko held it with both hands despite her sore wrist. "For you, Sergeant Harris," she said. "We make it from Broken Saddle, to say thank you." Inside lay a carved horse figurine, smooth and simple, its mane shaped like wind. Underneath, burned into the wood. No fence between hearts. Harris cleared his throat, eyes bright. "Tell him it'll stay on my desk till I retire." Ben watched from the doorway, the harmonica music drifting across the yard again. He realized the camp no longer sounded like confinement. It sounded like a town rebuilding itself note by note. The test ride a week later, Aiko insisted on riding at dawn, alone this time. Ben followed at a distance, hands in his pockets. She guided the mare out past the corral, toward the open pasture where wildflowers had begun to bloom. When she reached the ridge, she paused, turned the horse, and waved for him to join. "Too far," he called. She laughed. War was farther. He rode out to her, side by side beneath a pale sky streaked with orange. From up there they could see the whole camp. The barracks, the stables, the flagpole where 2 flags now hung. 1 American, 1 Red Cross. Between them, the morning light made both cloths glow the same color. A new beginning. When the camp finally closed in June, most of the nurses prepared to sail home. Aiko lingered by the fence, brushing the mare's mane. Ben walked up, hat in hand. "You'll be a legend where you're going," he said. She shook her head. "No, just nurse who learned to ride," he grinned. "That's legend enough." They didn't promise to write. War had taught them not to trust mail. Instead, she pressed a folded scrap into his hand. On it, in careful script, "If you see horse running free, think of peace." Ben kept that note in his wallet for the rest of his life. Autumn 1951. Texas had traded khaki for denim again. The old Camp Haven gates were gone, replaced by a wooden arch that read, "Haven Ranch, Veterans Rehabilitation Center." What had once been a place of wire and command now smelled of hay, soap, and second chances. Ben Rollins, older, a limp in his left leg from a post-war rodeo accident, worked as supervisor. He still carried the folded note Aiko had given him 5 years earlier, its edges worn soft as leather. Some mornings he'd open it, read the faded line, "If you see horse running free, think of peace," then tuck it back into his wallet like a prayer. That October, a telegram arrived from the Red Cross regional office in San Antonio. Japanese delegation arriving for medical exchange. Request local liaison familiar with POW medical programs. Contact Nurse A. Sasaki. Ben froze halfway through reading. He hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in years. Return. The train from Galveston hissed to a stop just past noon. Passengers spilled onto the platform, uniformed officials, aid workers, translators, and then she appeared. Smaller than he remembered, hair pinned neatly under a white cap, the red cross on her sleeve bright against the Texas sun. Aiko saw him before he could wave. For a moment neither moved. Then she smiled, bowing slightly. "Still cowboy?" He laughed. "Still nurse?" They walked the platform together, both talking at once, then pausing. The years folding in between them like pages closing. She told him she'd helped rebuild a hospital in Hiroshima. He told her about turning the camp into a rehab center for wounded veterans and local orphans. "You kept the horses?" she asked. "All but 2, he said. "The others live out by the creek. We use them to help men walk again." She looked down at the dusty boards beneath her shoes. Same lesson, different patients. Of the children's program that weekend, the town organized a fair for the visiting delegation. Music, pies, a small riding show. Ben asked if Aiko would help lead the new children's therapy session. "They're kids who lost fathers in the war," he explained. "We teach them balance, courage, trust. Sound familiar?" She nodded. "Everything repeats, but softer." When the afternoon sun dipped low, 10 children lined up by the fence, helmets slightly too big. Among them was a freckled boy with braces on both legs. Ben lifted him onto the same chestnut mare Aiko had once ridden. "She's gentle," he said. "Just listen to her breathing." Aiko walked beside the horse, one hand steady on the bridle. To the watching crowd, veterans, farmers, former guards, it looked like a memory reborn. Each slow lap of the ring erased another invisible scar. A reporter from the Houston Chronicle took photographs. The caption the next day would read, "Enemies no more. Texas and Japan ride for healing." Faith and forgiveness. That evening, as lanterns flickered around the old mess hall porch, Aiko joined Ben under the pecan tree. She watched fireflies spark above the grass. "In Japan," she said, "we say horses carry spirits of peace when people can't." Ben smiled. "Then you've been leading one a long time." She turned toward him. "After war, many forget kindness easier than pain. But I remember this place. It taught me to forgive what uniforms made us do." He looked at her hands, still thin, scarred from years of nursing, and said quietly, "You gave us something too. You taught us not to waste peace once we got it." They stood in silence a while, the night warm, the smell of cedar rising. From the barn came the low sound of a harmonica, same tune the Cowboys had played the night of the storm. Without speaking, they both laughed softly. Some melodies, like peace, survive without translation. The ceremony. Before the delegation left, the mayor held a small ceremony at the corral. He unveiled a new sign carved in oak, Haven Riding Center, founded 1946, where compassion heals. Aiko stepped forward to cut the ribbon. Long time ago, she told the crowd, we rode to learn freedom. Today we ride to teach it. Applause rippled across the yard. Ben caught her eye, tipping his hat as the children led the horses in a slow circle around them, flags of both nations waving side by side. Aiko's eyes glistened. No fence between hearts, she whispered. He nodded. That's what we built here. Epilogue. Years later, when the ranch became part of the state's veteran care program, the carved horse the nurses had given Sergeant Harris still stood in the main office. Tourists sometimes asked who made it. The caretakers would point to the engraving on the base, no fence, between hearts, and tell the story of the Japanese nurses and the Texas cowboys who taught the world how peace rides best in daylight. In a display case nearby lay a yellowed scrap of paper, the ink faint but legible. If you see horse running free, think of peace.